I think our plan is for Ray to spend some time responding to all the different speakers, and then for us to open it up to a little bit more of a round table discussion.
So I've scattered some notes, and I'll try to make this fairly coherent. I'll start out with an announcement. If you're not completely saturated with this discussion, I will be speaking here again on Monday here at Stanford at Dinkelspiel Auditorium at 6 o'clock. Monday at 6. You don't need a ticket, and there will be a lot of interaction. So if you have more ideas to share that aren't satisfied today, there's more. Let me try to address some of the points made by some of the speakers. Doug made a number of characterizations of my thesis, which I'd like to respond to. One was saying that I was describing 10 different technologies, and if each one is 50-50, then the likelihood that all 10 would come to pass is 1 in 2 to the 10th, which is about 1 in 1,000. That's actually a misunderstanding of the point of describing 10 different approaches to achieving strong AI. And if you think about the basic theorem that allows computers like this to work, I mean, there are billions of bits, billions of transistor logical functions in here, and each one is quite unreliable. So if each one is unreliable, and this has billions of them, how can it operate so reliably? It can go trillions of cycles and not make a single mistake, despite the fact that the components are pretty unreliable. Well, Shannon and von Neumann proved a series of theorems saying that you can get very reliable performance out of unreliable components, basically through redundancy and error checking, and you can achieve through engineering any desired level of accuracy with sufficient redundancy and error checking. So the whole point of describing different paths to strong AI and to the basic requirements is not that all 10 of them have to work. Actually, any one approach will suffice, and if each of us is 50-50 for argument's sake, the chance that any one of them will work is not 1 in 1,000, but 999 out of 1,000. For you math students, it's 1,023 out of 1,024. And there's more than 10 different approaches. And we don't have to get 10 different technologies to work. There's 2 basic requirements. There's hardware and software. The hardware capacity is on one track. There are many different paths. One path is just actually conventional chips. The ITRS roadmap, which has been followed quite accurately for decades, that continues to contemplate just photolithography and just shrinking features and using error checking to compensate now for unreliable components, contemplates 4 nanometer features in 2018. Those chips would enable not only strong AI, but cheap strong AI. You could have enough computes to simulate the entire human brain for about $1,000 in 2020. Molecular technology is working in laboratories. Nanotubes, which actually was my favorite in the age of spiritual machines, is in the lead. But there's actually 10 different approaches, building computing with DNA chips, many different types of molecular computing that is working in thousands of different laboratories at different stages of progress, any one of which can provide the computational requirements. Nanotubes are already working. I don't think it's a reasonable skepticism that those won't work. On the software side is a little bit more complex. I agree with Sebastian that we're in an early stage, but the algorithms are progressing. Recall that, halfway through the Genome Project, we collected 1% of the genome. The progress is exponential. I don't know if we had conferred, who was it who said that the doubling time is 6 years? Is that you, Eliezer? No, John, yeah. I don't know if we came up with that independently, but that is also my figure. Looking at the capability of software from different vantage points, growth in complexity, growth in sophistication of algorithms, there's definitely steady progress. There are very impressive applications deeply integrated in our economic infrastructure at all levels that were research projects when we last met at the Spiritual Robots conference in the year 2000. These are now widely deployed and quite impressive. and computers are human capability in many specific narrow areas. And there are many paths to strong AI. There's understanding the human brain, reverse engineering it, not then thoughtlessly just copying that into a computational substrate, but allowing that to expand the AI toolkit, which has been expanding on its own without input from brain reverse engineering. We are beginning to get now some of these models, mathematical models, of how the human brain treats different types of information. Sebastian, you put up a chart of 7 different perspectives of how the computer interprets the landscape in front of it. It actually reminds me of some recent brain reverse engineering of the visual cortex. Apparently the early visual cortex is sending to the brain 7 different pictures kind of similar to that, very reduced, very sparse information, and that's all the brain gets, of these 7 highly data reduced images, which can, in fact, you can see as very low resolution movies. We basically hallucinate what we see. The brain actually does not get all that information. We use our memory of what we've seen before and these different visual cues that are the output of the visual pre-processing system. But we are making progress on understanding the human brain. There's only several hundred regions. We have pretty impressive models and simulations of 24 of them. They're not perfect, but progress in that area is also exponential. So Doug put up a chart talking about or taking issue with the idea of hitting a wall, that was the idea itself contradictory. I think information technology does have a wall, but I analyze that carefully, as have some of the other speakers, in terms of what we know about the physics of computation and communication, and the capability of information technology at its ultimate based on the physics of computation are quite daunting. There are limits, but they're not very limiting. And even based on known paradigm circuits that are working in laboratories like nanotubes, the capabilities are quite vast. And the various technologies you put up on this chart, quantum computing, DNA computing, PICO technology, femto technology, none of these are actually part of the scenario. We can hypothesize or debate what is possible after the singularity and the kinds of technologies that may be feasible. I mean, there is some kind of computational process going on inside atoms that allow them to follow the laws of physics. Do they provide universal computation? We don't know. Can we harness those for computation? We don't know. Eric and I have a debate or dialogue inside my book where we debate, is it feasible to do computation with subatomic particles? And we basically don't draw any firm conclusion, although Eric expresses a lot of skepticism. The prospect of inexpensive, strong AI really relies on known principles, known types of circuits, and can even be done with conventional two-dimensional photolithography. There was some confusion in that Doug pointed out the potential complexity that takes place in one neuron, and if you then consider that there are 100 billion neurons, that must be much more complexity than the 30 to 100 million bytes that I was describing. I think we need to distinguish between the capacity of the hardware, where we do need to match all of that capability of 100 trillion connections among 100 billion neurons, and the complexity of the design. Because the former is a hardware problem. This has been analyzed by a lot of different thinkers as to what kind of computation is required to emulate all the different regions of the brain. I've taken the more conservative of those analyses and come up that we will have plenty of computation in the 2020s to do that. The design information has to do with the complexity of the software. And complexity in software, there are different measures of it. Those are inherently log measures. We are making steady progress. There's a doubling time of about 5 or 6 years. At that rate, we will achieve the level of complexity needed. That's not a sufficient proof, but it is a necessary condition to achieve human-level AI. So this is a complex issue which I approach in different ways in the book, and you can read the argument. But the basic idea is not just to reverse engineer the brain and dump it into a computational substrate, but the steady expansion of the AI toolkit which has occurred, and we see more and more sophisticated performance among all these different types of systems, basically in the area of pattern recognition. And that's really the right way to do human language, not with rule-based systems, but to apply the sort of soft edges of pattern recognition to understand human language. So when we developed speech recognition, we understood that there were 44 phonemes and that there were different phonetic rules as to how these phonemes are put together. We didn't tell the system that. We let it use pattern recognition to discover that information from databases. And one of the things that's expanding exponentially are the databases that we have to perform this type of pattern recognition. Doug put up a chart about software crashing. I think I did comment on that. We can create actually very reliable mission-critical software. And moreover, if we build software, as we increasingly are, and hardware systems to be self-organizing, where there's, I mean, if you open up this device and cut a wire, it'll break it. If you cut a connection in the brain, there are a couple of connections you don't want to cut, but most of them, if you cut them, it will have almost no impact because the information is holographically distributed in a region. There's no chief executive officer neuron. There's emergent properties of this sort of complex dynamic system. And there's an increasing understanding of the mathematics of how to characterize these complex dynamic systems. And that's really one of the paradigms that we're learning. And we've had complex dynamic self-organizing systems in AI for some time, but we're actually building better ones, more sophisticated ones, as we get better clues as to how to do that. I mentioned utility foglets. I mean, that's one very specific scenario. I think that you misunderstood that. That is not to build structures like the Taj Mahal out of these interlocking nano entities, but rather that particular scenario, which is an interesting one by J. Storrs Hall, who I think is here, is actually to create virtual reality environments in the real world, that these foglets create a visual and auditory front to create the illusion of seeing some virtual environment, like the illusion of seeing Bill here, or the illusion of a full immersion virtual reality environment. It's really a virtual reality technology. I don't recall where I wrote about engineering sub-quark level computation, but really anything beyond molecular computing using nanotubes, which is working, is really in the area of speculation. It's not necessary for any of the scenarios that we've discussed. Let me jump to Bill's compelling talk, and I think we do need to use wisdom as we apply these technologies. I think we need to ask ourselves what our goals are, what the goals of human life is. And it's not my view that more is better. In fact, a lot of these technologies, because of John's allusion to MEST, matter, energy, space, time, compression, use less and less resources, are smaller and smaller. They're not necessarily bigger, but they do create more capabilities. And I think a lot of these technologies really empower the kinds of goals that Bill was articulating. This technology, communication technology, for example, is very democratizing. I wrote in my first book, The Age of Intelligent Machines, in the 1980s, that the Soviet Union would probably fall apart because of the democratizing effects of what was then emerging as decentralized communication. There are early forms of email using these teletype machines, fax machines, and that if they gave their professionals these tools, it would destroy totalitarian control. If they denied them the tools, it would destroy their economy. I actually predicted they would do both, and both would do them in. And I think that's what we saw in this 1991 coup against Gorbachev. This clandestine network of decentralized communication broke the paradigm of authoritarian control, taking the central TV and radio station, keeping everybody in the dark. And Yeltsin standing on a tank made a good photo op, but it really had very little to do with overturning that coup. It was the fact that everybody was in the know. Had opportunity to have lunch recently with Gorbachev, and I told him the story, and he said, yes, that's absolutely what happens, and anything to put Yeltsin down would go over well with Gorbachev. But the whole democratization movement on the political level that we saw in the 1990s was fueled by decentralized communication, of which the internet is the quintessential example. And it is quite democratizing now all over the world, even in China and Iran. I mean, there's millions of blogs in those two countries alone. And it creates community But community doesn't have to be restricted to the accident of geography, which sometimes can be quite onerous. We can create communities based on common interest. Common interest, for example, like having a disease. It's democratized the power relationship between patients and doctors. If patients have a chronic disease, they've studied that disease. They get all the posts and all the new developments. They go into their doctor's office fully informed. That doctor may be responsible for 100 diseases and very often is less informed on that particular disease than their patients. This technology is also very empowering of our creativity. A kid now in her dorm room can command the equivalent of $1 million recording studio of 10 years ago, or a $10 million motion picture studio with just her PC and some software and a video camera. In fact, there's a lot of very successful movies like Penguins that were made for a relatively small amount of money with a few, passionate people who had some story to tell and fairly inexpensive equipment. A couple of students here in their dorm room created a little piece of software that is not, as I mentioned earlier, is worth $100 billion, and that has also revolutionized our relationship to knowledge. And speaking of knowledge, and the question, is there a goal? I don't think we'll just sit and contemplate these three philosophical questions. The goal really is knowledge, but knowledge is a community process. Art, music. I mean, we don't just create art and music as an abstract piece of knowledge. It's a way of sharing emotional messages in a community, and that's what these technologies empower us to do. Are we satisfied with our lives? I think that's kind of a trick question. If you asked a caveman or woman, what would it take for you to be satisfied? Well, if I could just get this fire to last a little bit longer, if this, if we could make this cave, if I could find a little bit bigger cave, that would, I'd be happy. Ask somebody 100 years ago, if I could just, this job of hauling granite, if I could just have that be a stable job and not constantly be fired and laid off, I'd be happy. Our expectations grow. That is, in fact, what is wonderful and unique about human beings. We expand our horizons, and we're always pushing against those horizons. And even as our tools to create knowledge get more powerful, we're always pushing against that barrier of the limitations of human knowledge. And so we're always a little bit dissatisfied. And I think as our horizons grow bigger, we get more dissatisfied. And we also have a front row seat now. There's a battle halfway across the world, and some horrible things happen. We are right there. This is enhancing our sense of community, but it's also enhancing our sense of pain. But it's a good thing in that we become aware of problems and therefore have the motivation to overcome them, which wasn't true 100 years ago when we didn't have these communication technologies. If you want to make things like global warming as bad as possible, then you would not pursue these new technologies. There's a difference between the old industrial technologies, which are crude tools, and you can argue to what extent they've helped or hurt humanity. Overall, I think we do live much better lives, and were described by Thomas Hobbes a couple hundred years ago as short and brutish and disaster-prone and disease-filled, but we still have a lot of problems. These new technologies, they do have profound downsides, but they are much more precise and much more powerful. I describe in the book how we can overcome global warming with nanotechnology. We have solar panels today, but they're heavy, they're inefficient, they're expensive, hard to install. They really can't solve the problem. If we captured 1% of 1%, 1 part in 10,000 of the sunlight that falls on the Earth, we'd meet 100% of our energy needs in a clean, renewable fashion. The current generation of solar panels can't do that. There's a new generation of solar panels that some people here are in fact funding with their venture capital firms. That will make a significant contribution because they're much more efficient. But if you go out 20 years, the kinds of solar panels that will be feasible with the kind of nano assembly that Eric talked about will really facilitate solving that problem. We'll be able to create extremely inexpensive, extremely efficient solar panels built into prefabricated construction materials that can capture that 1 part in 10,000. Actually, by that time, it'll be 3 parts in 10,000 and meet our energy needs in a fully renewable fashion. And that's really just one of the profound problems that we're struggling with. My next car is going to be a hybrid, but that's not going to solve the problem. There is a lot more we can and should do at each point in time to overcome these problems in the area of climate change and I think equally importantly pollution. We should be, more conservation conscious in areas of, for example, sharing technology. We should be more willing to bridge the divides that currently exist. But the only way to really solve these problems is with the scale that these new technologies will bring. Technology ultimately is widely shared. The technology is unaffordable only when it doesn't work. A few years later, technology is merely expensive and works a little bit better. A few years after that, it's relatively inexpensive and works quite well. And then it becomes almost free and is quite effective. You can see that in things like AIDS drugs, which is an information technology. 15 years ago, with $30,000 per patient per year and didn't work very well. Now they're in sub-Saharan Africa, $100 per patient per year, and actually work quite effectively. Still too expensive for the individuals there, but it's now feasible for foundations and other groups to actually begin to solve that problem. We're making strides in poverty. The World Bank reported poverty has been cut in half in Asia and will be cut by 90% within 10 years because of the information technology. Many of these societies where you had a majority of the population with primitive agrarian economies. Most people were pushing a plow. Now most people have cell phones and they have thriving information economies. And this is really spreading around the world. So these technologies ultimately become quite ubiquitous. And they ultimately overcome severe problems. We still have a lot of suffering in the world in the form of disease. Doug also made comment on my theme of living forever or indefinitely. The book that I came out with in 2004 talks about 3 bridges to radical life extension. Bridge 1 being taking care of yourself today using the expanding frontier of knowledge, something that's particularly important for baby boomers like myself. Those of you who are younger will be in good shape 10 or 15 years from now when we have Bridge 2, and I think baby boomers can also if we're aggressive in applying today's knowledge, which is Bridge 1. But Bridge 2 is this moving frontier of biotechnology where we are mastering and reprogramming the methods of biology. And we didn't get a chance to talk about that very much, but we are gaining the means to really reprogram who we are in terms of our health processes. We have RNA interference that can turn genes off. And there are various genes that are responsible for disease, or basically the disease depends on. If you can turn off those genes, you can turn off disease. In fact, one gene was turned off in mice called the fat insulin receptor gene. That gene basically says hold on to every calorie because the next hunting season may not work out so well. And when that now underlies an epidemic of obesity. When that gene was turned off, these mice ate a lot and remained slim and got the health benefits of being slim. There's a lot of other genes we'd like to turn off. We can add new genes. Pfizer's torcetrapib turns off one enzyme that allows atherosclerosis, the cause of 90% of heart attacks, to proceed. The phase 2 trials showed it really stopped atherosclerosis, which is quite revolutionary. They're spending a record $1 billion on the phase 3 trials. People have this idea that drugs are kind of a mixed bag. They have a lot of side effects. That was true. This old school of drugs, which were basically found tools. We just happen to find something that lowers blood pressure. We don't really know why it works. These new tools are really reprogramming the information processes underlying biology, because biology really is an information process. And biology has gone, and medicine is transforming from this pre-information era of hit or miss to this post-information era where we can really reprogram it. Reprogram it to do what? Well, to overcome things like cancer. And that's a good thing because cancer is a devastating disease. And there's a lot of people aren't here because they're suffering in one way or another, and they can't partake in the community that we're establishing because of the limitations we have with our biology, which we are gaining the means of overcoming. And that's not a new story. That's something that has been picking up speed, but now that we're gaining the tools to really reprogram biology, we'll be able to do that at increasing effectiveness. And so I make the case in that book that within 15 years, we will add more than a year to remaining life expectancy every year. Now, remaining life expectancy isn't a guarantee. You could get hit by one of Sebastian's automated cards tomorrow, but your likelihood is that you're going to live longer the longer you live, and so your life expectancy moves out away from you. I believe that's a good thing that will enable us to continue the real goal of human life, which is to expand human knowledge. So I made other notes, but let me see here. One quibble with Eliezer. I do think a primary application of this is, in fact, to enhance humanity. I just joined the visiting committee of the School of Biological Engineering at MIT. The first new course number in 39 years, basically being not just to reprogram biology, but also to enhance biology by having all kinds of little systems go inside us to diagnose us and enhance us. And that's a very pervasive field. There's 4 major conferences on biomems. We are already doing a lot of work to enhance who we are, not just so that we can break new Olympic records, but really to be healthier, to partake in the human experience. I think it's really a great tragedy that people die even at 80 or 90, really when they're just getting going, and all the tremendous wisdom that they've accumulated. Overpopulation is not going to be a problem. I don't think we should bar admittance to the human species. We don't really need to do that. Human population's actually been starting to decrease. It will increase again when we dramatically cut the death rate, but it's not going to expand that quickly. As we make even material technologies with programmable nanotechnology, basically an information technology, and we're doubling the price, performance, capacity, and bandwidth of information technology each year, and that's a much faster doubling time than the doubling time of the biological population, even if it starts growing again, which is going to have a very long doubling time. We'll be able to meet the material needs of an expanded human population and expand the communities that we have to serve. And there's many different scenarios whereby we are merging with our technology. We're certainly getting closer to it. When I went to MIT, the computer was far away. It was across campus. Now we have them on our desks. They're in our pockets. There's many projects to put them in our clothing. The Army and also virtual surgery has images written directly to your retina from your eyeglasses to put you in a virtual reality environment. We will be online all the time, walking around in virtual reality environments and augmented reality environments without technology that isn't really not inside us, but in our clothing, in our eyeglasses. And we will start having technology go inside us. It'll get closer. One woman told me that her son's computer might as well be inside our son's brain because he carries it around with him all the time. It's really an extension of who he is. He always has 5 windows open on his screen. When she walks in the doorway, she's basically another window on his life. But it's really just a convenient place to put your computer because you don't lose it that way, and it can integrate with who you are in a much more effective manner. But I think we do need, as Bill points out, to ask these questions. Who are we and what do we want? I think fundamentally, creating communities is basically the glue that holds communities together is knowledge. Art, music, history, literature, science, engineering, technology, all of these are the kinds of knowledge that we share in these communities and that enhance human relationships. And that is really the purpose of human life, in my view. And personally, I'd like a lot more time to partake and contribute to that purpose of the human species. Thank you very much.